welcome back to KXAN Live. I'm your anchor, Esmeralda Zamora, and today we have our Nick's First Warning weather segment with meteorologist Nick Bannon. Nick, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm well. You know, we're past Christmas. It's the final day of 2024, so we're looking ahead to some pretty big changes ahead as we get into 2025.
And it looks like we're entering 2025 with some cooler temperatures. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we already cooled off from yesterday. We got to 89 yesterday, as many of you already know. Temperatures today will only top out in the upper 60s. This is a gorgeous view on the final day of the year from our Austonian weather camera here live. But we're looking ahead past these next few days and into the weekend and beyond, where a pretty strong cold front's going to set the stage for some of the coldest air that we've seen here so far this year. Our coldest day this year was early in December. We had highs of just 48 in Austin. And we think that while that was just a one-day thing, we think that we could have that type of cold lasting a little bit longer here. So here's the next several days. You see we sort of bumble our way through the 60s Saturday. Then we're in the 70s on Sunday, just ahead of a cold front. That cold front's a strong one, and there's going to be plenty of colder air dropping in from the north behind that front, serving to reinforce the cold that comes in Sunday into Monday. So Sunday, highs of 74. Monday, 53. Tuesday, we may not get out of the 40s. So the chilly air on the way, and in fact, Tuesday morning, we're expecting that Austin's got a pretty good chance of our first freeze since last winter. Austin at Camp Mabry technically has not had a freeze since last winter, although many communities just outside of the city and even within the city limits already have. Camp Mabry itself has not. So we're thinking there's a pretty good odds of next week bringing that first freeze of these colder months. Look at the departure from normal map as we head through Monday and Tuesday of next week. You can see all that blue in the middle of the country and even in the eastern third of the country too, as that cold starts to spread south and then east as we head through next week. In fact, we're not going to be the only ones seeing the colder than normal air. Really, much of the country will be colder than normal during this next week period toward the middle of January. Look at the darker blues indicating even higher confidence in colder than normal to the east of us. So technically we're going to be on the western fringes of the cold that will be focused even more so on areas just to our east. I mean, look here, this is January 8th through the 14th, colder than normal, with that bullseye there right over Georgia indicating that they are exceedingly likely to have colder than normal temperatures, and that type of chill could set down into Florida as well, and then much of the East Coast colder than normal here during this 8th through the 14th period of January. So as far as things stand, we're not going to get the worst of it as far as the cold goes. So you may have seen a lot online of people sharing doom and gloom wintry weather graphics for next week, and we're not expecting that. We do think it will be our coldest stretch of winter so far, of these colder months so far, and since last winter. But right now, we're not thinking terribly cold, but some colder nights, some sub-freezing temperatures at night seem a good bet for at least a couple of nights next week, and also some much chillier days too.
Wow. So we have that colder weather coming. Mm-hmm. What about precipitation? Are we going to be seeing any rain?
Yeah, so rain is possible. Of course, the chitter-chatter is not just around the potential for rain, but the potential for some wintry weather. And what I'm going to show you is two different deterministic computer models. These are basically the main models that many of us use, the American model first, and then eventually I'll show you the European model. But these are not the only models that we look at. We have what's called ensemble models as well, which are subtle variations on these models that I'm showing you that all don't point to the same thing. Through the American model first, the GFS as it's known. A little rain chance late in the day on Sunday as our cold front comes through into Sunday night. And then it gets chilly, and then potentially toward the middle and end of next week, some signs of the potential anyway for some wintry weather. Now the blue color here is snow, pink is a wintry mix of snow, sleet, freezing rain, and green is rain. You can see the middle of next week we may be looking at some wintry weather. Now let's look at the European computer model as far as its thoughts. A couple of sprinkles here Thursday, no big deal. Slight chance for a little rain, mostly in our eastern counties as we get into Sunday, late Sunday. And then by the middle of next week, we start talking about wet weather. But this model here is warmer, or at least it's not as wintry for next Wednesday. So you're mostly seeing green and not the snow in the blue or the wintry mix in the pink. But then later next week, Thursday instead of Wednesday on this European model, the potential for some snow to be nearby. And I'll show you these just two models, but there are other models that are a little harder to plug into our computer models here and display graphically that don't show any snow at all next week. That don't even show wintry precipitation, that keep temperatures well above freezing during the day and mostly above freezing during the night. So it is not a guarantee that we get wintry weather as far as precipitation goes by any stretch of the imagination next week, but it is certainly within the realm of possibilities, and we've seen enough confidence or consistency, I should say, in a few of those longer range models that we can say that wintry weather is possible next week. I just don't want you taking away from this, Nick said it's going to snow next week. That is not true, at least yet. It is possible, but it is not what we are currently looking at. I will say that the National or the Climate Prediction Center with the National Weather Service are leaning near normal for precipitation during that stretch of the 8th through the 14th, with wetter than normal just to our south, drier than normal just to our north. So we're not seeing that colder than normal that I showed you a few slides ago that we are leaning toward, overlapping necessarily with the wetter than normal. So if we were near normal or even drier than normal during this stretch of cold, then we would miss out on some wintry precipitation. And we will know more as we get closer, it seems obvious to say, but these computer models that go beyond the 7-day are not quite as high resolution as the ones that look, say, 2 to 3 days out. They give a much better and much more accurate representation of what to expect. But there are enough clues that we're starting to ascertain from these longer range models that we do want to give you this heads up about the likelihood of colder than normal and the potential for some wintry weather. So I do want to sum it up for you here. We gave this first warning for you last night at 6, and we're continuing the messaging here today for those of you that didn't hear that first message last night, that this is what we're talking about arriving next week. The coldest stretches of days since last winter. Arriving, technically, it starts getting colder next Monday, but I don't think the coldest air since last winter is going to be here on Monday. I think Monday is the transition day. We're talking mostly Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and possibly Friday of next week when we start to feel much colder. For all of central Texas, where we could be looking at some nighttime freezes, likely getting above freezing during the day, the way things are looking now, but the potential for some wintry precipitation. So that sort of sums it up. And Esme, I know you've seen that I posted a blog all about these expectations on kxan.com. I updated it just a few moments ago with the latest 7-day temperature trend. And of course, we're going to continue to update it over the coming days until the wintry or potentially wintry part of our forecast becomes more short-term rather than this long-term outlook that we're talking about.
Yes, and we have that article on our website. You can find it under First Warning, Signs of Wintry Weather Next Week. And it is also on our homepage, easier for anyone to find it if they're looking for it. When we were speaking before starting our stream, you said something about looking into the January forecast. Did you want to touch on that a little?
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, we got the preliminary outlook for January from the Climate Prediction Center. They update these outlooks. They issue them first about a couple of weeks before the month, and then their final outlook comes the day before a new month begins, and today is a day before January begins. So they just updated it within the last hour. for what they're expecting here for January. So this is their January rainfall outlook. And of course, rainfall can also mean wintry precipitation. So any precipitation, but mostly here in Central Texas, even in the wintertime, our precipitation falls in the form of rain, mostly. And you can see we are still in that drier than normal zone from their outlook. They were thinking a couple weeks ago that our January would be drier than normal, and they're thinking that way now. In fact, you may remember our winter weather outlook from the first warning weather team. We looked at this La Nina pattern that's developing, and that usually gives way to a drier than normal winter and a warmer than normal one as well. So drier than normal is still the expectation. Of course, the darker the shading, the higher the confidence in being drier than normal. So we're not in this, more likely drier than normal, but we're in this sort of probably drier than normal section here. And then as you get farther east and northeast, then it's more leaning drier than normal. And then you get into the near normal as you get deeper into Louisiana and farther east. So drier than normal, still on track here for January. What changed a little bit from 2 weeks ago was the temperature outlook. Of course, now we're looking at starting the first, not the first week of January, but say a few days into January, we're talking about this colder stretch coming. So the likelihood of a warmer than normal January has gone down a little bit. A couple weeks ago, we were in sort of this darker shading of much of a higher likelihood of a warmer than normal January. Now the odds have gone down for a warmer than normal January, but we're still leaning warmer than normal. So the shading here does not tell you the degree to which you are drier than normal or warmer than normal, but the likelihood of that happening. So we're less likely to have a warmer than normal January, but we're still leaning that way. And then you can say East Texas in towards western Louisiana near normal, and then eastern Louisiana and eastward colder than normal. So still expecting temperatures to be above average in January. Just the confidence is not as high about that happening, and especially because of this sort of first half of the month, which will likely end up colder than normal. But as the pattern probably heads back to what is typical for a La Nina January and a La Nina winter, we'll eventually see those near normal and then above normal temperatures returning as we get later into the month. This is what is normal in January. Average highs at the beginning of the month are at 62. Technically, we start to average warming later in the month. So we sort of reach our coldest part of the year, early to mid-January, and then our average temperatures climb. Our average lows in the low 40s, and then basically stay that way here through the month, from 42 at the beginning of the month to 43 by the end. We usually get a little over 2.5 inches of rain. So looking at all of these numbers, it means that January is typically our coldest month and our fourth driest month. So we don't usually get a lot of precipitation in January anyway, and we're looking even drier than that. So a dry month looking even drier.
Nick, we have a few questions from our Facebook viewers, and
Okay.
one of our viewers, Ray, was worried about ice accumulation on power lines and his trees. What suggestions do you have for him?
Ice accumulation on power lines and trees. So at this point, we're still too far away from the arrival of any wintry precipitation to talk about what form precipitation could be in. It could be rain. It could, which would be fine. In fact, we would love it. But it could be the snow, sleet, freezing rain mixture, okay? We're too early to talk about the specifics of those details yet. We've just seen some signs that point maybe toward wintry weather mixing in for some of us next week. But too early is the answer that we're going to give here for a few more days until our confidence goes up as we get a little bit closer. I wouldn't start panicking or worrying about wintry precipitation as far as the things that you need to do about it just yet. Now, January usually being our coldest month of the year, I would do the things that you usually do in January, putting those bibs on your outside spigots, protecting your plants, or giving up on them for the rest of the winter if they're not native. Usually the native plants do okay here in the winter. It's sort of bone-chillingly cold and icy. But do the things that you usually do ahead of colder temperatures that are typical during January and into February here in Central Texas. As we get a few days closer to any potentially wintry weather or very cold weather next week, we'll be able to sort of get a better idea about what types of preparation things would be necessary. It's a little too early for that right now.
Yeah. We have another question, and it's from Riley, and they say, I got an 85%. Sorry, we just got another question and it moved it. I got an 85% chance of snow for next week for last night. Is that select or is that wintry next week?
You've got an 85% chance. What did it say, Esme?
It says, I got an 85% chance of snow for next week last night. Is that sleet or is that wintry next week?
So we are not, it is too far out of our 7-day to give any percentages at all. So if you're looking at different sources that are giving a high chance of wintry weather, I would use caution with any models that go that far out. Next 7 days, we do a 7-day forecast for a reason, because as you extend it out too far, accuracy just goes way down. And certainly if you're getting information about 85% chance of wintry weather for next week, too early for that. We're just sort of picking up on some pattern recognition for next week, colder seeming likely and wintry precipitation seeming possible. And that's about as specific as we're comfortable being for next week. But our comfort will likely go up as confidence goes up, and then we could be more specific. So be careful about those weather apps that come with your phones. A lot of them are tied to one computer model, and as that model updates multiple times a day, that forecast will go up and down and change around, and it's not hand-tailored. We put in the numbers on our KXAN weather app for the next 7 days and the next 48 hours. So those are the numbers that come directly from us. Anything beyond that 7-day or beyond the 48 hours would be computer model data. But those other apps, the ones that you get with the phone or download off the internet, most of them are just one model and what that model thinks is going to happen where you are. But they're so variable and they're not looking at the big picture. They're just looking at that one computer model. So just be cautious about where you're getting your information from. And we're going to do our best to be responsible with the heads up that we give you, while at the same time trying to get more and more specific as we slowly approach this chillier air for next week.
Yes, so we are having likely chillier air and possible showers.
Exactly. That's the way we're trying to sum it up. It is likely going to be colder than normal next week. Colder than normal. Normal is 62. So we are likely to see highs below the 60s next week, likely much below. And it is possible we have wintry weather next week, but it is still too far to be specific on that.
Yes. Well, if anyone is interested in reading more, again, this article is on our homepage. It's under Signs of Wintry Weather Next Week. Nick, is there anything else you want to share before we head out?
Yeah, just keep checking back with us. I urge you, don't take what we've been talking about today and close your eyes for the next 7 days and then wake up next week wondering what the latest is. We're going to keep updating you as we go through the coming days about any trends. Those trends could be warmer and drier, or they could be colder and more wintry. And we'll, of course, keep you as up to date as we possibly can.
Thank you so much for joining us, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
That's all we have today for Nick's First Warning. We'll have a couple more streams happening tomorrow. You can meet us here in the morning at 9:30, and we hope to see you here. Thank you.